Peter, what's it like being a private equity CEO?
It's, I guess private equity are like any other investor in some ways. They just have different needs. And I think any CEO needs to invest the right level of time in keeping their investors up to date and engaged. So specifically with private equity, there are all types of private equity in the market. I think it's about understanding which particular type you're working with, what their requirements are, and then making sure that the kind of engagement and reporting that you provide to them on an ongoing basis supplies their needs. Because you have to recognize that they also have investors in a way in their particular funds, and therefore them investing in you means that by you keeping them up to date, they're able to better keep their investors up to date, keep the funds up to date, and make them successful as well, which in turn helps you to be successful.
So I've always had this impression that being a CEO of a private equity-backed company is extra hard, but maybe it's because I have actually worked in a private equity firm myself, so I know what we used to do. But I have this particular. I remember I used to work in a financial PR and lobbying firm in the city when I first started my career. And we were working on an IPO of a Blackstone-owned company. And I remember seeing the CEO, and he looked a bit blue, to be honest. When we took him on the roadshow, he was kind of like this blue-green color. And then I realized it was because, the poor guy just hadn't slept for ages and he was working so much. And I mean, I thought I was working a lot, but when I saw the workload that he had, I really thought, okay, well, he's going to deserve that money when he gets it. So do you think, is it a fair assumption that being a CEO of a private equity-backed company is harder, or does it just really depend on the investors?
I think it is. I think it's harder from the point of view that it's more structured. The relationship tends to be more structured. You find that if you've got high net worth or individual investors in your business, that relationship tends to be more fluid and ongoing and arguably a little bit more casual.
A bit more human.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. And I think private equity, probably reflecting their needs, does require a little bit more structure. So they expect reporting to be in a particular shape. They obviously expect board meetings, etc., to be in a particular way, in a particular format. I tend to find that it comes in sort of peaks and troughs, that sometimes it's very full on. And to your point about that CEO that you knew, sometimes it can involve burning the midnight oil, and, it doesn't seem to be that you've got time to do anything else other than, meet the needs of the investor. But at other times, it can be quite sort of low contact, providing that you've got the right structure and process in place to deliver what they need.
There's something I just wanted to pick up on for our audience, because I know we've got founders and we've got investors listening. So I remember I had this experience when I had investors in my first tech company who had basically been private equity investors, and they then invested in an early stage company. And the kind of level of reporting they expected us to do was completely inappropriate. Not inappropriate that, they wanted dirty photos. No, it was inappropriate for our stage. The kind of reporting that they were used to, was prepared by a bunch of, analysts, basically by a kind of almost like an investment banking department. And we were a team of 8 to 10 people, and most of those people were developers. So the person doing the reporting was essentially me. And I remember at first I was trying really hard because I was like, okay, this is probably what I'm supposed to do. And then I remember thinking, I'm spending so much of my time putting together these reports, which are frankly quite meaningless for a really early stage company, that I don't really have the time to go out and speak to customers and speak to press and, deal with the product. So just for our audience, if you're on the private equity side and you're getting into early stage investing, just be aware that you might make this mistake and basically don't do it. And if you are a founder and you are finding yourself in a situation where the requests for data are basically just becoming too much, have that conversation with your investors, because they might be making a mistake and they are basically unaware. Okay, so Peter, when we spoke earlier, you had worked with P houses that have been, easier to work with and some that have been more cutthroat. So what's the difference? So what does a cutthroat private equity owner look like versus a a more friendly one? Because it's all difficult. So what's really the difference?
I think for me, it's probably from a private equity perspective, how quickly do they want to get value out of the business probably sort of drives how they behave with that business. And if I think about two private equity houses that I've worked with that would fall into those kind of camps that you've just described, one clearly bought a business that they anticipated getting value out of very, very quickly. And the reality was, when I got involved with that business, there was an awful lot to do. There was a lot of operational things to change. There was a need to bring technology and digital awareness into the company. And all of those kind of things take time. And while you're doing that, obviously from the private equity perspective, it was frustrating for them because they felt that the business was in a place where it could have moved faster. And the reality was, from an operational perspective, it couldn't. And the consequence of that is they become more and more frustrated. The pressure grows, and that then has a knock-on effect onto the management team within the company, and probably to all of the employees as you're trying to deliver something that just isn't realistic. And on the flip side of that, I currently work with private equity house that are very collaborative, who appreciate that things take time. It's not that they don't challenge in the same way or have expectations in the same way, but they do give you time to set out how long something might take and what kind of plans that you're prepared to put in place in order to deliver them. And then they're prepared to be patient and allow you to do that. I think there's they have to trust you as well. And they're clearly both the good and the bad, in my experience, need to understand that they've dropped the CEO in for a reason. They've got a management team for a reason. And therefore, there needs to be a level of trust that on neither side do you want to take longer than is required. And that's where the trust comes into it, that they need to believe that you will actually deliver it in the end for them.
So when you decided to work with this PE firm the second time and you already had this harder experience, how could you tell that these were the good guys? Like what? Because, now you're working with them, you already have a track record with them, so but when you're getting in the early stage discussions, how do you know that you're about to get involved with somebody who, has an approach that you agree with versus somebody who's like, look, let's just get in there, load it up with debt and then flip it?
Yeah, I think it's actually quite sort of early stage. I would encourage anybody that's taking investment into the business, whether or not they're an operational CEO or a founder, to take time to actually try and build relationship ahead of deciding which particular private equity house they're going to go with from an investment perspective. I think it's important to build up that relationship, and you begin to get a sense of it, I think, when you do your early stage engagement in investment presentations to those particular private equity houses. What kind of questions do they ask? How detailed do they want to be? What kind of information are they looking for? You can begin to tell, I think, where a private equity house might ultimately end up. If they're fixated with numbers and Excel spreadsheets and that level of detail, then I think that's what you're going to get on the other side. If they're more interested in, product, how you might go to market, what your customer base looks like, those kind of questions, then you might be getting a more collaborative private equity support on the other side. And I think you've just got to decide for yourself through those early stages what kind of relationship you're going to get and who do you want to work with. And who's going to give you the sort of best outcome for not just in terms of return, but I think in terms of supporting the management team, getting involved in the business in a collaborative way, being engaging, those kind of things, which is the way in which I prefer to work. But I think it all happens right at the very beginning and figuring out who you want to work with and who you don't. And I guess one of the challenges within that is quite often when you're early stage, you might only have one or two to choose from. And again, I would probably encourage anybody in that sort of situation that rather than going with the only one that you've got, maybe take your time if you can and try and get some others that you could almost interview, work with, build the relationship with, so you can figure out who's going to give your business the best kind of relationship in order to get where you want to be.
So, I was thinking of all these dating analogies as you were speaking that, audience, there's, I don't know, I think some of you have definitely been in these situations when you kind of have this feeling that like, this is probably not a good idea, but you really want it to work out. So you just close your eyes to the things that are definitely red flags. You can do that with investors too. When you're essentially speaking to somebody who's really focused on the Excel spreadsheet, but you're like, no, they're going to be collaborative. Like once we sign, they're going to really care about product innovation. And I think what Peter is saying is like, no, don't lie to yourself. See them for what they are. Even if you really want the money. And I think this is the problem, right? Like when you need to raise a round and you've got maybe one really interested party, but you're just not vibing with them, that's really difficult. Solved by essentially getting more interested parties. But that is usually easier said than done. So, Peter, I would now love to get into your own journey as a non-technical leader, because you started working in a retailer and now you basically lead a tech company. I'd love to kind of understand that journey. So you basically went from being in a pure retailer to leading a mobile network basically kind of overnight. So did you expect that you were going to be out of your depth, or was this a total surprise?
No, I think I knew I would be out of my depth when it happened. I mean, I guess life is a series of sort of opportunities, isn't it? And you either take them or you stay in your safe territory. And those were options for me. I mean, I had a brilliant opportunity when I was with Carphone Warehouse to develop a mobile network from the ground up. And that mobile network, 10 years later, still exists in the UK, still trades in the UK. And I've always been the kind of person that whatever opportunity comes along, you throw yourself at it, because life's too short, isn't it? You need to go after everything, and some of it works out and some of it doesn't work out, but at least you've given it a go. And I had absolutely no idea how to set up a mobile network, but threw myself into it. And over a period of 12 months, we built it, we launched it. And that was really my pivot into the technology world that I'll be forever grateful that I actually did, because technology is moving at such a pace and is so exciting today that you would want to be a part of it, rather than where I was prior to that, which was, in the retail world, which I dearly loved, but is quite sort of one-dimensional.
So I'm curious, how did you get the job of a CEO of a mobile network when you basically had no relevant experience?
It was an internal move, and it was going to be attached to the business that I was already running as a CEO. So we had an opportunity from a larger network, because we were going to set up what's called a virtual network, which effectively sits on a major network's infrastructure. So we had an opportunity given to us that would have added significant value to the business that I was already running. And it was too big an opportunity really for us to turn down. So it was a case of throwing ourselves completely into it.
So I think this is actually a really good example of something that I say to people who want to work in a tech company and want to basically transition in a senior leadership role in it, is that yes, you can go for a job in Amazon or Meta or, the obvious ones. But actually, you could also join a traditional business and then go into its tech bit and actually build a career there. So, for example, you could join Nike. When I think of Nike, I think of shoes, athletic wear, right? Michael Jordan. But the Nike Run app is actually a really big deal. So the digital transformation that they've had there, that part of Nike is really like a B2C tech company. So you could totally work for a traditional business and also build your career in tech at the same time. So, Peter, when you sat in rooms with really technical people and you didn't understand what was going on, how did you manage to lead them when they were doing something completely incomprehensible to you?
Yeah, I think the first thing is it was actually quite important for me personally to be in the rooms. It would have been very, very easy to, bring on board a number of consultants and surround myself with the experts and just let them work away. But I really wanted to immerse myself in what was happening and understand what was happening, because I think that was the best way that I could both influence it to make sure the outcome was the right one for us, but also understand what it was we built from the ground up. So you're right that it meant that I was in rooms where some of what was being talked about I didn't understand, but I guess I sat there and copiously took notes, and outside of the room asked the experts exactly, what it was they were talking about, and really sort of deep diving and understanding what it was. So bizarrely today, I couldn't build a network, but I could describe it to you. I could describe exactly what you need to think about, how you go about it, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to immerse myself and get really stuck into it.
It's really interesting to see how that happens. I remember I hired a developer. This was a couple of years ago. And I remember I said to him, like, I'm a non-technical founder, just so you know who you're going to be working with. And he said, well, given the questions and like the scope and the tasks and like given our discussion so far, I wouldn't really call you a non-technical founder. And I was just so surprised. I'm like, because I can't build any, like, if you write code, I'm not going to be able to be like, yes, this is good or this is bad. But it's once you get to a level when you can actually describe things, like you can speak the language and you can collaborate with somebody, then I think you get to a level where actually people don't even know you can't build anything. Unless you obviously run a company called Tech for Non-Techies and you tell everybody. So I'm curious. So now you are running a company which started off basically with Excel. And now it's really, really AI powered. So I'd love to kind of understand the origin story of that, because we have a lot of non-technical founders who are listening, and these people would really want to understand, okay, how does a company go from basically being built with a really simple tool that we all have to then becoming a tech company that has private equity investors? Like, what are the steps? Because I think many people want to do that. And so if they see successful examples of that will be inspiring, but also very useful.
Yeah. So our journey, and I'm not a founder, just to be clear, I'm the CEO that joined the business about 2.5 years ago, but the business has actually existed for about 8 years. And the two founders that started it were both subject matter experts in insurance, which is where our business sits. We provide data and analytics tools into the insurance industry. They were subject matter experts in terms of insurance. They spotted a gap in the market. They came out of what they were doing and started this business, and initially started with an angel investor that enabled them to get going. And then they used their network in the industry that they'd spent all of their lives in order to deploy the early stage product, which was effectively a sort of matchmaking product that allowed an insurance broker to find the right insurer to take a particular risk on behalf of commercial customers. And as a kind of byproduct of that, they began to accumulate data. It's the data that has allowed the business to evolve into what it is today. But the early stage, I suppose, momentum that they managed to get in the industry then meant that they went for Series A relatively quickly, within about 3 years of the business starting. And that's where they got private equity investment involved in the business. And the reality is that today we've still got the same private equity investor, and we've still got that original angel investor involved and a number of other sort of high net worths. So that's kind of where our financial investment has come from. But the data was really the sort of key to what we have today, because there was a point in time where the business realized that it could begin to build other products, other reporting based on all of the data that it had in its database, that then provided the insurance industry with new things that it could look at, better quality information. Yeah. And that's kind of brought us to, that's brought us to the kind of products and services that we provide into the industry today. But I joined 2.5 years ago, effectively, because the founders got to a point where they needed sort of technology leadership in order to scale up. And they needed somebody to come on board that could help them I suppose, operationalize the vision that they had for the business. And that's the journey that we've then gone on over the last 2.5 years, taking the business from what was a Power BI based product to now being a fully AI enabled platform, which is now sort of servicing the industry and building on, the foundations that the founders originally sort of put in place.
I think I just want to return to that data point because it reminds me of a conversation that I had with a corporate client recently, because they were saying, okay, just through our transactions with our customers, and this is like one of the biggest consumer companies in the US. And they were saying, because we have so many transactions with our customers, we really know what people want. We have a lot of first party data. And now we're wondering, what can we do with our first party data? Like, how can we use it to create a B2B product where we're essentially using this byproduct to make more money? And I think this is a really interesting thing to do for companies that, okay, you start off with one thing. Through that, you're basically selling it, you're understanding consumer behavior or, whatever business behavior, buyer behavior rather. And out of that, you're generating a lot of data out of which you can then make an even more profitable, even more scalable product, which sounds like this is what you're doing. So when you joined the company 2.5 years ago, you said that there were 15%. So 15% of the people were tech people. And now tech people are 50% of the workforce. So that's a really, really big transformation of a team in a relatively short amount of time. So how did that go? Like, was it smooth? Were the non-technical people like, yeah, sure, come in, back-end engineer, I have no idea what you're doing, let's collaborate? Or how did it go?
I think the good thing was that the board and the founders recognized that they had a vision for the business to, the direction the business needed to go on from a technology perspective was a good starting point for me, because it kind of enabled me to not have to worry about, I've got to take people on a journey or convince people or persuade people that this is the right direction to go. It's almost the business had already decided that that's what it needed to do, albeit that obviously we've had to take everybody on that change journey. The fundamental thing that has changed is that what was happening was that our sales team and commercial team were meeting customers. Customers were asking for particular products, particular reports, and then the sales and commercial team would bring them back to the business, and the developers and the tech teams would build them. And there was no product team within the business at all at that particular point. So it was all very reactionary and not really sort of thinking about what they had in terms of a data asset and how that could be deployed in a different way. And the real sort of change that we've done over the last couple of years is we've become product and data led. So we now innovate and produce new things that we, via our sales and commercial team, take to our customers and deploy into our customers rather than the other way around. And that's the big difference. And the consequence of that is we don't need as big a commercial team going out there and endlessly meeting with people and endlessly sort of developing new things that they brought back to base and the base then built. Instead, we have an emphasis on product, technology and data people who produce amazing things that then our commercial and salespeople find easier to sell and deploy into our customers.
It's so interesting you said that, because I've literally just been talking to a company that is just at the start of that journey and they're just finding it so difficult. So it's a company that basically has a really, really good B2B sales team. So the B2B sales team go and get these corporate contracts for their tech product. Then they come back and basically tell the engineering team and the product team, like, this is what we need to build. So as a result, this company has lots of different versions of the same product, but each version is slightly different. And so essentially it's a lot of cost. It's basically a mess. It's really not a product driven company. And now the founder is like, hang on a second, how did this thing happen where we were essentially duplicating the product all the time with just tiny changes for this corporate client and that corporate client? And so they're basically trying to change it and make it into a product focused company. But, from what I'm seeing, it's really requiring some bravery from the founder's part, because he's thinking, well, do I change my management team? He's got a management team that's been really good, that's been really loyal. They also really do have good B2B sales relationships, and they win B2B awards and so on. And so he's thinking, well, if I go and do this and change this into a product focused company, it's going to be a completely different thing with a different team. So there's definitely some soul searching going on there. And I just appreciate that what you went through. It's a difficult journey. And I think even deciding to go on that journey is a hard decision to make. So what is your advice, Peter, to people who are business leaders who are either leading tech companies or leading AI in digital transformation, essentially where, you're a business leader, the thing that you're leading heavily depends on something that you can't do yourself. So what is your advice to people in that position?
I think my advice would be to, as I did back, way back with that telco network, is to immerse yourself in it. I don't think that you can have it happening, sort of remotely from you and you're still trying to manage and lead the business without really understanding it. I think you've got to get into the meetings, get into the sort of technical meetings. If you're outsourcing at all, get involved in those kind of bigger projects as much as you possibly can, because I think then you'll never be able to code or build a tech stack from scratch, but you will understand the fundamentals of it. And you will understand, let's just say you want to take a product to market, what might be involved in actually taking that product to market and what kind of questions to ask and what kind of checks and balances to put in place. So that would be my advice, because if you're a technology-based business, or in fact, if you're any business these days, you used the example of Nike earlier, I think you can't ignore technology and you can't ignore what's going on in the big outside world. So the faster that you get involved, begin to learn about it, begin to understand it and how it might impact your business, the faster you're going to be able to make significant headway as an organization as well.
Well, Peter, you have just inadvertently advertised listening to the Tech for Non-Techies podcast, which now has more than 300 episodes, basically really about this. And yes, there are interviews with leaders like Peter, but also there are lots of episodes where basically I am teaching you a specific concept. So listen to this podcast. And also, Peter, you have inadvertently advertised actually bringing in Tech for Non-Techies into your organization, or just taking one of our courses, because literally this is what we're specializing in helping people who are non-technical succeed and thrive in an age changed by technology. So I'd love to leave it on that note. Thank you very much, Peter, for joining us and sharing your wisdom. And audience, have a wonderful day, and I shall be back in your delightful smart ears next week. Ciao.
Thank you.